The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us, Asor Nisyonos Nisnas Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, our founding patriarch, was tested with 10 tests, v'omed b'kulam, and he met every one of those challenges. He succeeded, met every one of the challenges. Lodia kamechi bosa shel Avraham Avinu olav hashalom. This informs us what level of love Avraham Avinu had for God, that he was willing to meet every challenge, as difficult as it was. He was totally negated to God due to his love, overwhelming love for God. That's the mission in Pirkei Avos. So over here, Rashi, in his commentary on Pirkei Avos, writes, why was he tested with 10 tests? So he explains, he says, it's stated in the Midrash, why was he tested with 10 tests? Keneged Yud Moros, who just began gracious, that existence came into existence through 10 utterances of God. Okay, so we find those 10 utterances. L'lamdoch, to teach us, sheb'schuso olam omed, that it's only in his merit the world continues to exist. That's why there were 10 tests. He meets the 10 challenges. That's a reflection that everything is based on Avraham, as we mentioned yesterday. There was no person who did chesed as Avraham. His attribute was loving kindness. Only due to his level of sacrifice, which he withstood the 10 tests, did he give meaning to existence, and therefore the world continues. So all humanity are beneficiaries of God's indiscriminate kindness due to Avraham, his sacrifice, that he's willing to meet the challenges which God presented him with. And that's why he was the founding father of the Jewish people. B'schuso, in his merit, the world continues. In the words of the Balaturim, in his merit, the world was created. Not that it's only continues to exist, it was created. Because if there wouldn't have been an Avraham, the world would have had no value. Because the only value was ultimately that the Jewish people should stand at Sinai when the Torah was offered to them and say, we accept unequivocally, which happened. But that's only because our foundation were the three patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, each one being a pillar in his own right and being the location of the divine presence during their lifetime. The question is, which was the first test that Avraham was challenged? What was the first challenge? Well, if you read where we discussed the portion of Lech Lecha, Avraham is in Choron, that's still in the Mesopotamian area, and God says to him, Lech Lecha, me'artzcha, me'artzcha be'savicha. Leave your land, your birthplace, and the household of your father to the land that I will show you. That was a test. Nobody argues. Leaving his homeland, his birthplace, and his family was a test. The question is, what preceded that moment? There were a number of other challenges. Were they tests? The Torah alludes to something, to an event. It's not explicit in Torah, but it's a very strong allusion. The Torah tells us that when he left Choron, which was the name of the community which he lived in, he left Ur Kasdim. The word Ur means the kiln. He had left the kiln of Kasdim. Why is that location referred to as the kiln of Kasdim? So the Midrash tells us what the Torah is alluding to, that Avram's father, whose name was Terach, was an idol manufacturer. And he sold the idols that he manufactured. And he says to his son, Avraham, could you mind the store? And Avraham says, of course. And Avraham at that point, his father didn't realize where he was at in terms of his development, that he was fully committed to monotheism. His father was a pagan. And his father, Avraham says to his father, my pleasure. What does he do? His father's out for a while. He takes an axe, smashes every idol in the inventory. Every idol he smashed, except for the largest of the idols. And he takes the axe and puts it in the arms of the largest idol. His father comes back, places his shambles, and he realizes the guy doesn't have insurance, no replacement value. He sees this, he's like livid. He says, Avraham, what happened? His father, he says to us, I'll tell you what happened. One of the patrons came in with food, and he offered the food as a sacrifice to one of the smaller idols. What happened? A fight broke out among all the idols, and they started a brawl and fight. And who do you think was the victor? The largest idol. He took the axe, smashed them all. That's what happened. That's why the place is in shambles. His father looks at him and says, you're talking to me? I'm not a fool. It's wood. It's stone. How do they fight? They have no life. So Avraham says to his father, Father, listen to your own words. It's stone and plaster and wood. How do you worship them? Don't you realize there's a monotheistic being? And all these deities are only manifestations of God's will. They have no independent power. So he understood immediately. Avram's the one who smashed all the idols. Being a devout pagan, he goes to the king. The king's name was Nimrod. He was the king. And he informs on his son to Nimrod. His son did something which is unforgivable. He's deserving of the death penalty. A father informing on his own son. Avram was his eldest son. He was the Bechor. So evidently, you see, very interesting. Just as Lahavdil, Avram's love for God, Lahavdil, superseded his love for his own son, his firstborn. Terach's love for idolatry superseded the love for his son. That he was willing to give over his son to be killed because he did something which is sacrilegious, disgraceful, unforgivable. That's what his father did. So he comes before Terach. Terach brings his son to Nimrod. And Nimrod says, I have the ability to pardon you, but on one condition. If you bow to the idol, you'll be pardoned. And you commit yourself never to do this ever again. If not, you're going into the kiln. And this was the community of Kasdim. Avram says, I will go into the kiln and not bow. What happened? Nimrod said, you have a choice. He says, my choice is to go in and die. And he went to the kiln. He could have lived. Bow and believe what you want in your own heart. That it's a bunch of nonsense. You could have saved your life. You could have been spared. He says, no. I will perform a Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of God's name. I will die on behalf of God. And he went into the fire. What happened? You know what happened? Miraculously, God performed a miracle, which we'll discuss more in detail. He came out alive. Did not die. His clothing were not even singed. His hair was not singed. And the Midrash tells us something very interesting. It's next week's reading. Initially, we find that there was an angel that was created for fire. And there's an angel which is created that's able to cool down the fire, that fire cannot burn, although you're in the fire. So the angel of fire says to God, let me go and save Avram's life, because he's doing something so outstandingly special, sanctifying your name. God says, no, this is me to do. This is not going to happen through an angel. I personally will save Avram's life. You, in the future, you'll be able to intercede to save Avram's descendants' life. What's the story? Fast forward a few thousand years, when the Jews were in Babylon during the 70th period, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor, who destroyed the first temple, had issued a decree that every subject of his must bow to his image. And if they don't bow, they must go into the kiln. So there were three individuals who were from the tribe of Judah, Shevet Judah, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were courtiers in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. They weren't just ordinary people. And they were Jews, they were devout Jews. And he said to them, although you're my courtiers, you must bow as every one of my subjects bow. And if not, you go into the kiln. They said, we will go into the kiln. And they went into the kiln. Miraculously, they came out alive. They came out of the fire. The angel who initially had offered to save Avraham, God says, that's your thing to do. In the future, you will have the opportunity to save three of Avram's descendants. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and they came out. They were not incinerated. This is the story. Now, Avram, who was a Noahide, a Jew, if he's given the ultimatum, either bow or die, a Jew has an obligation to give his life. Because there's a mitzvah called Kiddush Hashem. A Jew has an obligation to sanctify God's name. A non-Jew has no obligation to sanctify God's name. Avram's status, he was a Noahide. Avram was not a Jew. The Jewish people only came into being at Sinai. Avram Avinu had no obligation. He could have bowed, and it wouldn't be considered idolatry. Why? Because it was under coercion. He had no choice but to bow. It wasn't through his own volition. Nevertheless, he says, I will sanctify God's name. A public statement, I will give my life to teach the world who the master is, and I will die for God. So he had no obligation. And God performed the miracle. He came out alive. That's the story of Rome. This is the Ur Kasdim. The Torah says he left Ur Kasdim to go to Canaan, to go to the land that God will show him. So, without having the background of the oral law, knowing what that is, we have no idea what Ur Kasdim was. It was a city which they had a kiln there. No, the Torah is only sharing with us the location and what was there, because it's alluding to the fact Avraham Avinu went into the kiln to sanctify God's name. That's how great Avraham was, although he had no obligation. There's a question, was that a test? Was that a test or was it not a test? God did not tell him to go into the kiln. That's something he chose himself. So seemingly you would say it's not a test. What's a test? The dictate. God says, leave your homeland, leave your birthplace, leave your family. Go to the land that I will show you. In a moment, he picked himself up and left. There's no such thing as, have to prepare, have to get my house in order before we could actually shift out of here. And his family was there for centuries. They were never in Canaan. Canaan had the 7 nations of Canaan. The Canaanites were there. But without hesitation, he left. But it is counted by some as one of the tests, one of the 10 tests that Avraham was tested. The Pirkei de Rebbe Lezer, which was authored by Rebbe Lezer Godel, who was one of the greatest of the Tanoic period. His name is Rebbe Lezer ben Hurkinus. He records the 10 tests, or Kazdim. The kiln of Kazdim was one of those tests. Now, what did Avraham achieve when he went and came out? What did he achieve? So there's a midrash at the beginning of next week's reading, Lech Lecha. Midrash Tanchuma. The midrash tells us, cites a verse in Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which was written by Shlomo Melech, King Solomon. Shlomo Melech says, "Ochos lanu ktana, v'shadai mein lo." We have a young sister, v'shadai mein lo, and she has no breasts, meaning she hasn't developed as a woman. She's a young girl. But what is Shlomo Melech referring to? We know that Shir HaShirim is a love song, but it's an allegory for God's love for the Jewish people and the relationship between God and the Jews and the Jews and God. What is this referring to? A young sister who hasn't yet developed as a woman, has no breasts. Ba'avrom shishlichu nimrod toch kivsha. This is speaking about Avraham, who's thrown into the kiln by Nimrod, the king of that community. Ketano. Why is he referred to as Ketano, as a youngster? He was a youngster. Shadayin lo osla kodesh baruch hu nisim. Avraham never experienced in his life a miracle. Meaning, it's not, if he would have experienced miracles earlier, you'd say he went into the kiln because he knew he'd come out alive. But God never performed miracles on his behalf. So when he went into that kiln, he went in to die. Why is he for ochos? Ochos in Hebrew means a sister. Ketanos, he says, Ketana means she's a youngster. He never experienced miracles. What is ochos? Icha es olam v'nei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ka'odam shekoreh u'ma'achem. Now, a person who's an experienced tailor, and you come to him with a torn piece of cloth, torn garment, being an expert darner or weaver, whatever way the tear goes, the expert weaver, darner, he could fix that. He could weave it and put it back to its original state, that you won't even notice that it was ever torn. Avraham Avinu had the ability, the capacity, the genius. There was no question that he was never able to respond. He was able to reattach every human being with God. People were alienated from God because they believed in paganism. Avraham Avinu, by engaging in a dialogue about theology, he was able to reattach every human being to God. Whoever he engaged with, he could reattach them. As the expert weaver, donner, he's able to attach the two pieces of cloth to be fully restored. He was able to restore every person who engaged with into this theological dialogue. The Shadaim Einlo, what does it mean? And she have no breasts. Now, a woman has breasts. What is the value of breasts? That's so she'd be able to nurse a young. Shadaim lohoy lo bonim. He had no children. Avram at this point had no children. Now, King Solomon continues to speak. What will we do for our sister on the day that we speak about her? Listen to this. The day that Nimrod, the king, gave the decree, if he doesn't bow, he must be thrown into the kiln, into the fiery kiln. So Shlomo says in Shir HaShirim, Song of the Songs, Im chomehi, if it's a wall, nivno lea tiras kesef, if it's a wall which is sturdy, walls made of stone, nivno that tiras kesef, we will build an edifice of silver on top of that wall. And the wall being something which has permanence, it'll be able to be a permanent foundation for that silver edifice which is built on top of it. Im no say nafshe kachoma. What was God saying? If just as a wall is able to deflect all the attacks, that if Avraham has the conviction that he's so committed to God, as the wall she omedis b'nei milchamas harbe, that it's able to stand and withstand many confrontations and attacks. V'yimtzer atzmo al kedushas Hashem, and he has that conviction and that fortitude that he's able to give his life to sanctify my name. This is God speaking. If he's able, like that wall, that it's deflected and survived many battles. If Avraham has that conviction and the inner strength that he is able to give his life to sanctify my name, nivno le'atiras kesef, I will build on him. He's the foundation, an edifice of silver. Who's that edifice? Eli Yisrael. He will be the foundation for the Jewish people. If he's willing and he's able and he demonstrates his belief and his conviction even to give his life, he will be the foundation of the Jewish people. Why is it referred to as an edifice of silver? Shekrom kanfe yona nechva b'kesef. David HaMelech, King David in Psalms, refers to the Jewish people as the dove whose wings are coated with silver, which the Talmud discusses. A dove is unique as a bird. The Talmud tells us every bird, when it's attacked, it fights with its wings. That's how it fends off attack. But if it fights with its wings, what happens? If it's attacked in midair and it needs both wings to fend off the attacker, it falls to its death. A dove is unique. The only bird, it's able to fight with one wing and it can fly with the other wing. A dove could fly with one wing. The Jewish people, what is the silver on our wing? That's the mitzvos. And therefore we're worthy, as silver is white, represents the attribute of mercy. Because we have Torah and we have mitzvos, we're able to fight. We fly with one wing and we fend off the enemy with the other wing. So if he's like the choma, like the wall, who deflects all levels of attacks, he'll be foundation for the edifice of silver, which is the Jewish people. A delis in Hebrew is a door. What is a door made of? A door is made of wood. But the word delis, in Hebrew, the word dal means impoverished. An impoverished person is called a dal. But if he doesn't have the conviction and he's weak and he's not willing to give his life to sanctify my name, Notzer Olav Locheres, I will attach to that door a plank of cedar wood. What's cedar wood? Cedar. Matzur Shav Locheres Nocha Lishtashesh. If you take iron, silver, and you engrave something in it, it's etched forever. Wood, usually you paint something on it. You paint something, over time it will smudge and eventually totally evaporate. Meaning there's no permanence to it. Kach Avram, Eini Mashgiach Olav. But if he's not willing to give his life, he will not merit that divine protection that I will be with him forever. What was Avram's response when he was given this ultimatum, this choice? Do you want to be like that wall that deflects all battles, or you're going to be like that door. You're too weak. You don't have that level of conviction to give your life. Omer Avraham responded, Ani choma, I will be like that wall. My conviction is I'm willing to give my life. Lipsa nafshi al kedusha shibcha. I will give my life to sanctify your name. Lo ani bilvad, but not only myself. Ela v'shodai kimigdolos. My breasts will be like towers. What is that referring to? B'nei bonov, even my grandchildren. Meaning, I've inculcated in my spiritual genealogy that in the future, when my grandchildren will be confronted with a similar ultimatum to bow to the idol or go into the kiln, they will be like towers. They will go into the kiln. Chanai Mishob Azario, the Dorosher of Chananya ben Trajo, the 10 martyrs who were murdered brutally by the Romans. Each one of them gave their lives to sanctify God's name. They could have somehow evaded it, but they taught Torah publicly. Even though there was a decree, if you teach Torah publicly, you're going to be put to death, tortured to death. It did not stop them. And because Avraham Avinu went into the kiln and he established with his own genealogy this conviction and depth of understanding and belief that value of life is only sanctify God's name, his descendants follow suit. Therefore, Avraham said, because of this, I will always be seen in God's eyes as one who brings about shalom, peace. And that's why he came out of the kiln intact. Terach, his father, was an idol maker. See, Avram gives his life, which he ultimately, his future is the ultimate. Then not only does he have that level of conviction, all his descendants have that level of conviction, but his father's an idolater, a pagan. If that's the case, this is not an environment for you to be. Leave your land, leave your birthplace, leave your family, detach yourself. You're at a level now, it's inappropriate. And now you have an ability which surpasses anything you had until now. There's nothing you can't deflect. And this was the beginning of Avram's ascent, to develop through the 10 challenges, to become the founding father of the Jewish people. Every morning in Psukim de Zimra, in the part of the morning service, we say verses of praise. So there's a paragraph we say by Yevorach David. And over there we say, it concludes, Atu Hashem Elokim, you are God Almighty, Esher Bacharta B'Avrom. You chose Avram. This is before he became Abraham. You chose Avram. And you took him out of the kiln of Kasdim. You are the God who chose Avram, who took him out of God of Kasdim. And you found his heart faithful to you. Right? That's how that paragraph ends. You are God Almighty who chose Avram, who took him out of the kiln because you found his heart was faithful to you. What's the next paragraph? God entered into a covenant with him. For what? What was the covenant? To give him the land of Canaan, the 7 nations of Canaan. What does one thing have to do with another? because he went into the kiln. You found his heart faithful to you. Immediately, b'chorse bris. God entered a covenant. Lossus etzaknani achiti amori aprizi by Abusi and Gigoshi. To give him the land of Canaan, which is the seventh land of the seven nations of Canaan. What's the connection? What were the nations of Canaan? They personified evil. Now that Avraham Avinu has established himself, from this moment going forward, that he himself is the Chomer, he is the wall that could deflect any attack. What wall are we talking about? He is the wall of spirituality. He's a representation of good in the world. Because he's established himself due to his sacrifice of sanctification of God's name at that special level. Now, you're given the challenge or the task to eradicate evil from the world. That's what follows. Therefore, God now enters in the covenant. Now you have the task to go into Canaan and remove those seven nations of Canaan. Because you are the counterbalance to the evil. You represent good, they're evil. You have within your capacity that you could surpass them and destroy them. And that's why there's an obligation on the Jewish people. When we went into Canaan, that we were not permitted to leave any survivors of the seven nations of Canaan, because they are the representations of that evil for that reason. But that was only due that he went into the kiln, which, as I said, he had no obligation. He was a Noahide. But nevertheless, God says, if you are the Chomer, if you are like that wall who has deflected many battles, many attacks, you will be that one. To be my representation in existence, to represent good. And therefore, there's always going to be the struggle of good and evil. I'd mentioned Nimrod was the king who threw him into the kiln, who gave the order to throw him into the kiln. Nimrod and Avraham, each one was the counterbalance of the other. The day Avraham passed away at the age of 175, that same day, Nimrod was killed. Could you imagine the timing? Avraham, who was victimized by Nimrod, thrown into the kiln, and miraculously saved by God, God removes him from existence on the same day that Nimrod is taken out of existence. Nimrod was killed by Esav. Esav killed Nimrod. But why in the same day? The answer is because whenever we have a balance and a counterbalance, one cannot exist without the other. Avram's level of influence was so overwhelming. You need something to counter that. Otherwise, there's no free choice in the world. And if Avram passes away and you leave a Nimrod, the world goes off kilter because of the evil of Nimrod, what he represents. Therefore, almost simultaneously, when Avram was taken out of existence, when he passed away, Nimrod was killed on the same day. Because one has to counter the other one's influence. And only then do you have the balance for mankind to make the choice between good and evil. No.